Hello, my name is Ivan Taylor, and I'm from Policy Dynamics in Ontario, Canada. And today I'd like to talk to you about some work that myself and some my co-authors have been doing on the Sustainable Development Goals. And we have built a system dynamics simulation program to try to determine if a country will reach their goals by 2030. Um, these We've applied it to a number of countries, and we recently submitted a paper to the journal Sustainability, where we applied our model to Nigeria, India, and Japan. These are my co-authors. So if you're not familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, there's 17 of them, which I'll describe shortly. And these goals were adopted in 2015 by all United Nations members with the idea of achieving these goals by 2030. There are 17 goals, as I said. The first goal is no poverty. The second goal is zero hunger. The third goal is good health and well-being. The fourth goal is quality education. The fifth goal is gender equality. The sixth goal is clean water and sanitation. The seventh goal is affordable and clean energy. The eighth goal is decent work and economic growth. The ninth goal is industry innovation and infrastructure. The 10th goal is reduced inequalities. The 11th goal is sustainable cities and communities. The 12th goal is responsible consumption and production. The 13th goal is climate action. The 14th goal is life below water. The 15th goal is life on land. The 16th goal is peace and justice in strong institutions. And the 17th goal is partnership for the goals. So the purpose of our work was to establish the interconnections between these sustainable development goals and build a system dynamics simulation program to project the results into the future for people, for policymakers to help them in decision making, prioritizing, and planning their programs and policies to achieve the goals that they desire for their country. We began with a network model developed by LeBlanc in 2015. And we use that as the basis of our system dynamics model. What we added to LeBlanc's network diagram was the idea of polarities in the connections between the SDGs. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then we translated this network into what's called a stock and flow model, which is the basis of system dynamics simulation. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. Then we calibrate the model using the historical data that are provided in the Sustainable Development Report. And there's data on the SDGs in terms of a scale of 0 to 100 from the years 2000 to 2022. And we use that data to calibrate our model. And by calibrating, I mean that we tried to get the model to match the historical data. Then we found a way to optimize the model to get improvements in the Sustainable Development Goals by applying effort to improve the progress that is being made to achieve the goals. And this model can be applied to any country in the world. And as I said, we've written a paper where we applied it to Nigeria, India, and Japan. I've presented this model to the Canadian chapter of the System Dynamics Society and the Irish chapter of the System Dynamics Society. And we plan to present it at the South African System Dynamics Conference, and we'll use Zimbabwe as an example. I'm also working with someone in Togo in Africa to apply this model, and I hope to present this model at the Latin American System Dynamics Conference and apply the model to a few Latin American countries. Today I'm going to talk about Colombia specifically. So here's the network diagram that LeBlanc developed in 2015. And the big circles are the goals. There's 17 of them. And the small circles are the targets, which are sub-goals of the goals. And then the lines are the connections between the goals through the sub-goals. So one of the things that we can see here, for example, is that health and well-being is connected to poverty. In the red circle of health and well-being is connected to the yellow circle of reduced poverty. And there's a red goal that relates to the yellow circle. That means that health and well-being will have a causal relationship to poverty. And that means that improvements in health and well-being will help reduce poverty. And so we've used this network diagram to build a model using what we call polarities. So here are the polarities that we developed by looking carefully at the goals and the targets. And here we see that we have a number of SDGs, 17 SDGs in the rows, and the 17 SDGs in the columns. And then we have pluses and minuses in the square, some of the squares. And where there's a plus, that means that these two, this improvement in SDG 2 will cause an improvement in SDG 1, and a problem or a reduction in the value of SDG 2 will lead to a reduction in the value of SDG 1. So the plus sign means that they move in the same direction. However, it's a causal relationship, so this causes this to change. A minus sign means that they move in the opposite direction. So an increase in SDG 12 will lead to a decrease in SDG 1, and a decrease in SDG 12 will lead to an increase in SDG 1. So these move in the opposite direction, and they're causal in nature. The other thing I should mention is that the way that the matrix works is that the rows are the causes and the columns are the effects. So it's a cause and effect relationship where when one of these things change, it causes, when one of the things in the rows changes, it causes a change, either positive or negative, in the SDG, in the column. So now we converted this matrix of connections into a stock and flow diagram, which is the basis of system dynamics. And system dynamics is a method of computer simulation that allows things to change over time. And it uses a mathematical concept called differential equations. But what this model is showing is that there's a connection between SDG 1 and SDG 2 through this target and through this progression. So, for example, we start with an initial value for SDG 1, and then it changes over time based on this target that's defined by the government of the day. And then if the SDG score increases, then we see a value of the progression that's greater than 1. That is, that the progression is the current score divided by the initial score, which leads to a value greater than 1. And if the score goes down, then the progression is less than 1. So this can be either an improvement or a reduction, depending on how it relates to the initial value. And then this is connected to the target that's set by the government for SDG 2. And it may, as we showed in the previous matrix of connections, this SDG's progression may enhance the target, or it may inhibit the target. So it could enhance the target if it's positive, or it could inhibit the target if it's negative. And then we have this idea of changing over time. So we have this target we're trying to reach. We have a current value of the SDG, and we have a progression towards the target that changes with time. So each SDG has a different amount of time required to change it and move it towards the target. And this is referred to as a goal and a gap model. So we have the goal of the target, and then we have a gap between the goal and the current value that is closed over time by this kind of progression towards the target. And the last thing I want to mention is this multiplier concept. So the multiplier is set to 1 at the beginning of the model, and then we do the calibration. And then we're going to look at applying effort to improve the situation. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this value from 1 to something greater than 1 when we apply effort. So this multiplier, it will be discussed later in the presentation as the idea of effort to improve the target by applying new policies. And what the value of 1 means is that we have the status quo. So basically, there's a certain amount of effort being applied just to reach the target today. However, in the future, we might apply more effort than we're doing today to reach a higher value of the SDG score. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. So here are the SDG scores with no change or no increase in the effort. So basically, the effort is the multipliers are all set to 1, which means that we're applying the current effort to reach the goal, and we're not going to increase the effort. We're just going to apply the current effort throughout the whole period. And you can see that the graphs run from the year 2000 to the year 2030, and the model has been calibrated with data from 2000 to 2022, and then we use the model to project into the future how the SDGs will look in 2030. And notice that these lines are actually curves. They're not straight lines. So this is not a statistical model, which just would have a linear progression. It is a physics model or a calculus model that uses cause and effect relationships and produces a non-linear result. So we feel that this is a good technique for looking at projections into the future. Notice here that SDG 9, which is industry, innovation, and infrastructure, is the lowest performing SDG for Colombia of the first 9 SDGs. And now we'll look at the SDGs 10 through 17, and we see here that SDG 10 is the worst performing of these 8 SDGs. However, it is increasing recently in the last few years. So SDG 10 is reducing inequalities. So this would indicate that there's a lot of inequality in Colombia. Notice also that there's a few of these SDGs that are decreasing. So SDG 12 is SDG that relates to responsible consumption and production. So basically, there's a problem that's being seen in the data and being seen in the model that leads to a reduction in the ability of Colombia to do responsible production and consumption. The other thing that is declining here is SDG 13, which is climate action. So it appears that there's been a decreasing relationship with the SDGs that leads to a decline in climate action. These numbers are fairly high, but they are decreasing in recent years. So here are the projected scores with no change in the policy or no extra effort applied to improve the SDGs. So basically, we are looking at a situation which we've applied a certain amount of effort and continue to apply that throughout the whole period of time from 2020 to 2030. And that means the multipliers are all 1. So we can see here that no poverty, the SDG 1, has improved greatly in the last few years and is expected to improve quite a bit in the future. SDG 2, zero hunger, is expected to improve a little bit. Health and well-being is expected to improve to quite a high level. Quality education is expected to improve to a very high level. Gender equality was low in the beginning, but is improving and will continue to improve. Clean water and sanitation is expected to increase slightly in the future. Affordable and clean energy is about the same throughout the whole period. Decent work and economic growth is expected to increase slightly. Notice industry, innovation, and infrastructure is very low at the beginning. It is improving up until 2022, but it is not improving very much between 2022 and 2030. So those are the first 9 SDGs when there's no change in the policies. And now we have the SDGs 10 to 17, and we can see that reduced inequalities is very low in 2020 and is increasing and getting a little bit higher, expected to get a little bit higher in 2030. So, so this indicates that there is a lot of inequality in income in Colombia. Sustainable cities seems to be going down slightly. Responsible consumption and production is going down, as we saw in the graphs. Climate action is going down slightly. It's still at a very high level, but it is declining, as you can see. Life below water is about flatlining. Life on land is increasing slightly. Peace, justice, and strong institutions is expected to increase quite a bit by 2030. And partnership for the goals is expected to basically flatline between 2022 and 2030. So these are the projections that we make based on the historical data and our simulation model, which is based on cause and effect and uses physics and calculus. Now we're going to look at improving the situation by applying extra effort. And these are applying time, money, and resources to implement policies that will improve the SDG scores. However, it's not absolutely clear which scores should be emphasized. So what we decided is that we would try to maximize the minimum SDG score, which is industry, innovation, and infrastructure. And so we thought that by maximizing the minimum score, we would have a very much better situation overall for the SDGs for Colombia. So when we optimally allocate extra effort to maximize the minimum score, we see that we allocate about 83% of the effort to innovation, industry, innovation, and infrastructure, and 14% of the effort to reducing inequalities, a little bit of effort to gender equality, and a little bit of effort to quality education. So this is what we calculated as a way of prioritizing the extra effort that would be needed to improve the SDGs, the minimum SDG score. And so here's the results. So we can see that SDG 9, which is industry, innovation, and infrastructure, can be improved quite a bit with extra effort when it's applied in 2023. And then it will continue to improve, but it seems that it is getting a situation of diminishing returns where that extra effort is being applied will have less effect as it increases over time. So that's the first 9 SDGs. This is the next 8 SDGs, and it's hard to tell, but actually SDG 10, which was reduced inequalities, has increased quite a bit from the previous run of the model. And we can see that in these results here, where we compare the results when there's no change in policy and when there's extra effort applied and new policies are developed to improve the minimum SDG score. So we can see that by improving the minimum score, we can actually increase the value for zero hunger quite a bit and increase health and well-being a little bit. Education will drop a little bit, so we need to try to sustain that by applying a little effort here. Gender equality is also getting some effort, but that's just maintaining it at its current level. Clean water and sanitation doesn't change. Affordable and green energy doesn't change. But decent growth, decent work, and economic growth changes quite a bit. So we see that by investing in industry, innovation, and infrastructure, we can actually improve decent work and economic growth. And then we see here that the investment in industry, innovation, and infrastructure has resulted in a very good improvement in the score for SDG 9. Here are SDGs 10 to 17. We see that reducing inequalities has been improved quite a bit, which is hard to see in the graphs, but you can see here that there's been a 12% increase. Sustainable cities and communities has declined slightly, but look at responsible production and consumption. This has decreased quite a bit in the period when there's effort applied. So the idea here is that there will be trade-offs, that when you try to improve infrastructure and try to improve industry innovation and infrastructure, we may see declines in responsible production and consumption. Here is climate action, which is improved slightly. What life below water isn't changed. Life on land improves a little. Peace, justice, and institutions, strong institutions doesn't change, and partnership for the goals doesn't change. So we can see that there's improvements in many areas. However, not all areas have improved with extra effort. Here are the minimum scores so for over the period of 2000 to 2030. And you can see that the policies come into effect in 2023. And then you start to see improvements in the minimum score over what was done in the status quo or no extra effort situation. So in summary, we looked at Colombia's SDGs and we found that all of the SDGs showed an increasing trend except SDG 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities, SDG 12, Responsible Production and Consumption, and SDG 13, Climate Action. We found that in SDG 9, Industry, Innovation, and Infrastructure was the poorest performing SDG. And when we tried to optimally improve that minimum SDG score, most but not all of the extra effort was invested in SDG 9, 83%. However, this will cause SDG 12, Responsible Production and Consumption, to decline from the status quo projection. So improving SDG 9 is difficult and there will be trade-offs. However, it can be done. There are some limitations to this work. First of all, SDG reports come out annually, and each year with a new report, new data will be provided, and the model will need to be recalibrated and might produce slightly different results. Another limitation is that this idea of extra effort is a measure of time, people, and resources that are applied to improve the goals. However, it doesn't in particular identify actual policy changes and programs that need to be implemented. So the government of the day will have to determine the actual policy changes and programs to apply that extra effort to improve the SDGs. Also, the SDGs will vary in response to the same level of improvement effort. And this model basically assumes that they all will respond equally to the same amount of effort. So the final thing I want to say is that this model could be improved to assess different optimization goals. So instead of maximizing the minimum goal, we might want to maximize the average goal, or the median goal, or the average of all the goals. We want to apply this to many more countries, and hopefully we'll be applying it to Zimbabwe and to some Latin American countries in the near future. And then we want to demonstrate the model to policymakers, and we hope that our paper in the journal Sustainability will be widely read. And this, we believe that this model and this approach can help prioritize effort to improve the quality of life for a country's citizens. These are some references that we used to build the model. And thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, you can reach me at this email address, and my co-authors' email addresses are also shown here. So thank you very much. I hope that I'll hear from you sometime soon to see if you're interested in working with this model on possibly other applications.